I married the blind duke for his money, unaware he could see every move I made. I thought I was safe hiding my secrets in the winter dark. But when I looked in the mirror, his reflection wasn't staring at the wall, it was staring right at me. He was never blind. He was waiting. Now that the blizzard has trapped us inside, would he expose my betrayal or exact a terrifying revenge? Subscribe for more stories like this. Lady Victoria Hartley stood in the crumbling drawing room of Hartley Manor, staring at the stack of unpaid bills on her father's desk. The afternoon sun streamed through the dusty windows, highlighting every crack in the peeling wallpaper and every worn spot on the faded carpet. She was 20 years old, and the weight of her family's financial ruin sat heavily on her shoulders. "Vicky, dear, we've received another letter from the bank," her mother said softly from the doorway. "Mrs. Hartley's face looked tired and pale, making her appear much older than her 45 years. "They're threatening to take the manor by the end of the month." Victoria's hands trembled as she picked up the letter. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving behind nothing but debts and broken promises. Her younger brother, James, was only 15 and still in school. Her mother had been sick for years. Everything depended on Victoria now. "There must be something we can do," Victoria whispered, though she knew the truth. They had sold almost everything of value. The servants had been let go, except for old Mrs. Bennet, who refused to leave. Even the horses had been sold. Her mother walked closer and placed a gentle hand on Victoria's shoulder. "There is one option," she said quietly. "I received a letter yesterday from the Duchess of Ravenwood. She's looking for a suitable bride for her son, the Duke of Ravenwood." Victoria had heard of the Duke of Ravenwood. Everyone in England had. Nicholas Ravenwood, the young duke who had been blinded in a terrible riding accident 3 years ago. He was 28 years old, incredibly wealthy, and lived as a recluse in his massive estate in the countryside. People said he was bitter and cold, hiding away from society because of his disability. "Mother, I couldn't possibly," Victoria began. But her mother interrupted her. "His mother is offering a very generous settlement to the bride's family, enough to save the manor, pay off all our debts, and provide for James's education, enough to get me the medical treatment I need. I know it's not the love match you dreamed of, Vicky, but sometimes we must do what's necessary." Victoria looked around the room that had been her home since childhood. She thought of her brother's future, her mother's health, and the generations of Hartleys who had lived in this manor. Could she really marry a man she didn't love? A man she'd never even met? Just for money? But what choice did she have? "I'll do it," Victoria said firmly, straightening her spine. "I'll marry the Duke of Ravenwood." 3 weeks later, Victoria found herself in a carriage, traveling to Ravenwood Estate. The wedding had been arranged quickly and quietly. She had met the Duke only once, the day before the ceremony, and the meeting had been brief and awkward. He had sat in a high-backed chair in his study, his dark hair perfectly groomed, his handsome face turned toward the window. He wore dark glasses to hide his blind eyes, and he barely spoke during their introduction. "I understand this is a business arrangement," he had said in a deep, cool voice. "You need money. I need an heir. We shall both get what we want and stay out of each other's way." His coldness had stung, but Victoria reminded herself why she was doing this. It wasn't about love or happiness. It was about survival. Now, as the carriage rolled up the long drive to Ravenwood Estate, Victoria's breath caught in her throat. The mansion was enormous, built of gray stone with countless windows and towers. Gardens stretched out in every direction, perfectly maintained despite the Duke's isolation. Servants lined up at the entrance, and Victoria realized with a start that she was now the Duchess of Ravenwood. The butler, a stern man named Mr. Whitmore, helped her from the carriage. "Welcome, Your Grace," he said with a bow. "His Grace is waiting in the library. He asked that you join him when you're settled." Victoria was shown to her rooms, a suite of chambers that were larger than the entire ground floor of Hartley Manor. Everything was luxurious and beautiful, from the silk curtains to the carved furniture. A lady's maid named Sarah helped her change from her traveling clothes into a more suitable dress. "His Grace keeps to himself mostly, Your Grace," Sarah said as she arranged Victoria's hair. "But he's a fair master. Never cruel. Just distant." Victoria made her way to the library, her heart pounding. This was her new life now. She was married to a blind duke who had made it clear he wanted nothing from her except an heir. She would live in luxury while her husband remained a stranger. When she entered the library, the duke was standing by the fireplace, his hand resting on the mantel. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, his dark glasses hiding his expression. "Good evening, Victoria," he said. "I trust your rooms are satisfactory?" "Yes, thank you," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "Everything is very beautiful." "Good. We'll dine separately, as is customary. You're free to explore the estate and spend your time as you wish. I only ask that you don't disturb me in my private rooms." His tone was polite but cold, making it clear that this was not a real marriage. Victoria felt a flash of anger at his dismissive attitude, but she pushed it down. She had gotten what she wanted. Her family was saved. That was all that mattered. "As you wish, Your Grace," she said formally, giving a small curtsy before leaving the room. What Victoria didn't know, as she walked away, was that the Duke turned to watch her go, his lips curving into the smallest of smiles. Behind his dark glasses, his gray eyes followed her every movement with perfect clarity. Victoria's first week at Ravenwood Estate passed in a strange blur of loneliness and luxury. The mansion was beautiful but empty, like a museum where she was the only visitor. She spent her days exploring the endless rooms, walking through the gardens, and reading in the vast library. She saw her husband only at formal dinners, which were silent and awkward affairs where they sat at opposite ends of a long table. The Duke never removed his dark glasses, even indoors. He moved through the house, with surprising ease for someone who supposedly couldn't see, using a walking stick and relying on the servants for guidance. Victoria found herself watching him curiously during their dinners, wondering what kind of man he really was beneath that cold exterior. "More wine, Your Grace?" Mr. Whitmore asked one evening, interrupting her thoughts. "No, thank you," Victoria replied, glancing down the table at her husband. He was eating his meal with perfect precision, his movements careful, but not clumsy. "Mr. Whitmore, how long has the Duke been blind?" The butler's expression remained neutral. 3 years, Your Grace." "Since the riding accident. Was he very different before?" Victoria asked quietly. Mr. Whitmore hesitated, then said, "His Grace was once quite social and cheerful. The accident changed many things." He bowed and moved away, clearly uncomfortable discussing his master. That night, Victoria couldn't sleep. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and wandered through the dark hallways, her candle casting flickering shadows on the walls. The house was full of portraits of Ravenwood ancestors, all staring down at her with serious faces. She wondered if they would approve of her, a poor girl who had married their descendant for money. She found herself outside the Duke's private wing, the one area she had been forbidden to enter. Curiosity got the better of her, and she tried the door handle. It was unlocked. Victoria knew she shouldn't, but she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The Duke's rooms were surprisingly cozy compared to the rest of the mansion. There were books everywhere, comfortable chairs, and personal items that made the space feel lived in. Victoria picked up a framed photograph from a desk and gasped. It showed a younger Duke Nicholas, smiling broadly with a beautiful horse beside him. He looked so different, so alive and happy. "What do you think you're doing?" Victoria spun around, nearly dropping the candle. The Duke stood in the doorway, still wearing his dark glasses, even though it was the middle of the night. His jaw was tight with anger. "I'm so sorry," Victoria stammered, setting down the photograph with shaking hands. "I couldn't sleep, and I was curious. I shouldn't have come in here." "No, you shouldn't have," he said coldly. "I know, and I apologize." Victoria moved toward the door, wanting to escape his anger. "It won't happen again." As she passed him, she noticed something odd. His head had turned to follow her movement across the room. tracking her with perfect accuracy. For a blind man, it seemed strange. But before she could think about it further, she hurried back to her own rooms, her heart pounding. What Victoria didn't see was the Duke reaching up to remove his glasses once she was gone, revealing clear gray eyes that stared thoughtfully at the photograph she had touched. The next morning, Victoria received a letter from her mother. The medical treatments were going well, thanks to the money from the marriage settlement. James was thriving at his new school. The manor had been saved. Reading her mother's grateful words, Victoria felt her sacrifice had been worth it, even if her own life felt empty and lonely. She decided to spend the afternoon in the gardens. The head gardener, an elderly man named Mr. Foster, was happy to show her around. He pointed out all the different flowers and plants, clearly proud of his work. "Does the Duke ever come out here?" Victoria asked, admiring a bed of roses. "Not since the accident, Your Grace," Mr. Foster said sadly. "He used to love these gardens, spent hours out here. Now, he stays locked away in that house." Victoria felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. How terrible it must be to lose your sight and give up everything you loved. Despite his coldness toward her, she couldn't help feeling sorry for him. That evening at dinner, Victoria tried to start a conversation. "Your gardens are absolutely beautiful," she said. "Mr. Foster is clearly very talented." The Duke paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Yes, he is. Did you help design them?" Victoria pressed on, despite his short answer. "Before the accident, yes." His voice was clipped, discouraging further questions. But Victoria found herself unable to stop. You must miss it terribly. Being unable to see all that beauty. The Duke set down his fork with a sharp click. "What do you want from me, Victoria?" he asked, his voice hard. "I gave you what you came for. Money, security, a title. Why must you pretend to care about my feelings?" Victoria felt as if she'd been slapped. "I'm not pretending," she said quietly. "I may have married you for practical reasons, but that doesn't mean I'm heartless. You're my husband. Is it so wrong to try to know you?" "Yes," he said flatly. "Because this isn't that kind of marriage. I thought I made that clear." Victoria stood up, her napkin falling to the floor. "Perfectly clear, Your Grace." She left the dining room with as much dignity as she could manage, fighting back tears of frustration and hurt. In her room, she let herself cry. She had expected this marriage to be loveless, but she hadn't expected to feel so completely alone. The Duke didn't just want to avoid her. He seemed to actively resent her presence. And yet, she was trapped here, bound to him by law and by her family's needs. What Victoria didn't know was that the Duke sat alone in the dining room for a long time after she left. He slowly reached up and removed his glasses, staring at the empty chair where she had sat. His gray eyes were troubled and sad. "I'm sorry, Victoria," he whispered to the empty room, "but it's better this way." 2 months into her marriage, Victoria had settled into a routine at Ravenwood Estate. She spent her mornings in the library, her afternoons in the gardens, or riding the gentle mare the Duke had provided for her use, and her evenings alone in her rooms. She saw her husband only at dinner, and their conversations remained brief and formal. But something was beginning to bother Victoria. Little things that didn't quite add up. She first noticed it during dinner one evening. She had accidentally knocked over her wine glass, and the Duke's head had immediately turned toward the sound, his hand reaching out as if to help before he caught himself and pulled back. A blind man might hear the sound, but his reaction had been so immediate, so precise. Then there was the way he moved through the house. Yes, he used a walking stick, but Victoria had watched him navigate the corridors with barely a hesitation. He never bumped into furniture or walls. He seemed to know exactly where everything was, even in rooms he supposedly never visited. And strangest of all was the incident in the portrait gallery. Victoria had been admiring a painting when she heard footsteps. The Duke appeared, walking stick in hand, his dark glasses in place. He had stopped directly in front of a particular portrait without anyone guiding him there. "Your grandmother?" Victoria had asked, noting the resemblance. Yes, he had replied. This was always her favorite place to sit. He had gestured to a window seat nearby, his hand moving with certainty, not the careful searching of someone who couldn't see. Victoria's suspicions grew, but she told herself she was being foolish. Why would someone pretend to be blind? What possible reason could the Duke have for such an elaborate deception? One afternoon, Victoria was reading in the library when she heard voices in the hallway. She recognized the Duke's deep tone and Mr. Whitmore's crisp accent. Curious, she moved quietly to the door to listen. The doctor's report came back. "Your Grace," Mr. Whitmore was saying. "He confirms what we already knew. Your vision is perfect. There's no medical reason to continue the pretense." Victoria's heart stopped. "Perfect vision? I'll decide when to stop the pretense, Whitmore," the Duke replied sharply. "For now, things remain as they are." "But Your Grace, the new Duchess," "Especially with the Duchess," the Duke interrupted. "She married me for my money and title. She doesn't need to know anything else about me." Victoria backed away from the door, her mind reeling. He could see. The Duke could see perfectly well. This entire time, he had been lying to everyone, including her. But why? What was he hiding? She felt betrayed and angry, but also confused. If he could see, why did he pretend to be blind? Why did he live as a recluse, pushing everyone away? And what did this mean for their marriage? Victoria decided she needed proof before confronting him. Over the next week, she began watching her husband more carefully, looking for evidence of his deception. She accidentally left items in his path to see if he would avoid them. He did. She made sudden movements to see if his eyes would track them through his dark glasses. They did. But the final proof came one evening when Victoria decided to take a late walk in the gardens. The moon was full and bright, and she thought some fresh air might help clear her confused thoughts. She was standing by the rose garden when she heard footsteps on the gravel path. The Duke appeared, walking without his cane, without anyone to guide him, and most importantly, without his dark glasses. In the moonlight, Victoria could clearly see his eyes, open and alert, looking directly at the roses with an expression of deep sadness. Victoria stepped out from behind the hedge where she'd been standing. "Good evening, Your Grace," she said firmly. "Enjoying the view?" The Duke froze. For a moment, his eyes met hers directly, and Victoria saw panic flash across his face. Then, he quickly looked away, his hand coming up as if to shield his eyes. "Victoria," he said, his voice strained. "I didn't realize anyone was out here." "Clearly," she said, her voice cold with anger. "Just as you didn't realize I would ever discover your secret. You can see perfectly well, can't you?" The Duke was silent for a long moment. Then, he sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "I can see." "Why?" Victoria demanded, stepping closer. "Why would you lie about being blind? Why would you trick everyone?" The Duke turned away from her, staring out at the dark gardens. "It's complicated." "Then explain it to me," Victoria insisted. "I'm your wife. I deserve to know the truth." He laughed bitterly. "You're my wife in name only. You married me for my money, remember? What does it matter to you whether I can see or not?" His words stung because they were partially true. Victoria had married him for money. But that didn't mean she liked being lied to or treated like she didn't matter. "You're right," she said quietly. "I did marry you, for practical reasons. But I never lied to you about it. I was honest from the beginning. You've been lying to me every single day since we met." The Duke's jaw tightened. "You want the truth? Fine. I'll tell you the truth." He turned to face her, and in the moonlight, Victoria could see the pain in his eyes, the vulnerability he usually kept hidden behind those dark glasses. 3 years ago, I was engaged to a woman named Lady Isabella Thornton," he began. "I loved her. Or at least I thought I did. Then, I had my riding accident. I was injured badly, unconscious for days. The doctors weren't sure if I would survive. Victoria listened silently, her anger fading as she heard the pain in his voice. When I woke up, Isabella was there, he continued. She seemed so relieved, so caring. But then the doctors told everyone I would be blind for the rest of my life. Isabella's relief disappeared. Within a week, she broke off our engagement. She said she couldn't possibly marry a blind man, that it would be too much of a burden. That's terrible, Victoria whispered. The Duke smiled sadly. It gets worse. After Isabella left, I overheard the servants talking. They pitied me, but they also gossiped. They said Isabella had only been marrying me for the title and money anyway, and now that I was damaged goods, she'd moved on to better prospects. He paused, looking up at the stars. I was devastated, not just by losing Isabella, but by the realization that she'd never really loved me at all. I had been so blind, ironic, isn't it, to people's true motivations. But your eyes, Victoria said gently. You recovered? Yes. About 6 months after the accident, my vision started coming back. Within a year, it was completely restored. The doctors called it a miracle. He laughed bitterly, but by then I had realized something. Being blind had shown me the truth about the people around me. Without my sight, I could see clearly for the first time who really cared about me and who just wanted my wealth and title. Victoria's heart ached with understanding and guilt. So, you kept pretending to be blind to protect yourself. Yes, he admitted. I know it's cowardly, but I couldn't bear the thought of being deceived again. If everyone thought I was blind, they would show their true colors. No one would bother pretending to care about a disabled duke, including me. Victoria said softly, understanding now why he had been so cold to her. You think I'm just like Isabella, another woman who married you for your money and title? The Duke looked at her directly, and Victoria saw the hurt and mistrust in his eyes. Aren't you? He asked quietly. Nicholas looked at her with surprise. You've been wondering about me? Of course I have, Victoria said. Yes, I married you for practical reasons. But that doesn't mean I want to spend the rest of my life living with a stranger. That doesn't mean I enjoy eating dinner with someone who treats me like I'm invisible. I don't treat you like you're invisible, Nicholas protested. Victoria laughed sadly. Yes, you do. You barely speak to me. You forbid me from your private rooms. You made it very clear that this is a business arrangement and nothing more. Well, congratulations. You've gotten exactly what you wanted. A lonely, empty marriage with no trust and no friendship. Nicholas flinched at her words. That's not what I wanted. Then what do you want? Victoria asked, her frustration bubbling over. Because I'm tired of this, Nicholas. I'm tired of pretending everything is fine when we're both miserable. I'm tired of living in this beautiful house that feels like a tomb. I'm tired of having a husband who can't even stand to be in the same room with me. That's not true, Nicholas said, stepping closer to her. I don't hate being around you, Victoria. Then why do you avoid me? Victoria demanded. Why do you act like I'm some kind of enemy? Nicholas was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and vulnerable. Because you scare me. Victoria blinked in surprise. I scare you? Yes, he admitted. Because despite knowing why you married me, despite knowing this is just a business arrangement, I find myself wanting more. I watch you at dinner, and I notice the way you bite your lip when you're thinking. I hear you laughing with the gardeners, and I wish I could make you laugh like that. I see you reading in the library, and I want to ask what you think about the books. Victoria's heart was pounding. Nicholas, when you came into my rooms that night, he continued, I was angry because I'd been sitting there looking at that photograph, wishing I could be that person again, wishing I could be someone worthy of a real marriage, not this cold arrangement. And then you appeared, curious and kind, and I panicked. Because you make me feel things I swore I would never feel again. Victoria didn't know what to say. All this time, She'd thought he resented her. But instead, he'd been protecting himself from feelings he was afraid to have. "I'm sorry," Nicholas said, looking down at his hands. "I know that's not what you signed up for. You wanted money and security, not a husband with foolish emotions. I'll go back to avoiding you if that's what you prefer." "No," Victoria said quickly, reaching out to touch his arm. He looked up at her in surprise. "No, I don't want that." "You don't?" Victoria shook her head. "Nicholas, I married you for practical reasons, yes. But that was before I knew you. Before I saw the way you run your fingers along the books in the library like you're greeting old friends. Before I noticed how you listen to the servants, when they talk, really listen, because you care about them. Before I realized how lonely you must be, trapped in this lie you've been living." She stepped closer to him. "I'm not going to lie and say I love you, because I don't know you well enough yet, but I'd like to. I'd like to know the real Nicholas Ravenwood, not the cold duke or the blind recluse. I'd like us to have a real marriage, if you're willing to try." Nicholas stared at her, his gray eyes searching her face. "Even knowing I've been lying to you this whole time?" "Even knowing that," Victoria confirmed. "Though I do have one condition." "What's that?" "No more secrets," Victoria said firmly. "No more dark glasses and pretending. Not between us, at least. If we're going to try to make this marriage real, we need to be honest with each other." Nicholas reached up and removed his dark glasses, looking at her with clear eyes for the first time since their wedding day. "No more secrets," he agreed. "Though I should warn you, Whitmore and the servants know the truth. They've been helping me maintain the pretense. Then we'll tell them they don't have to pretend with me anymore," Victoria said. "But Nicholas, why do you still pretend with the rest of the world? Why not just announce that your vision has returned?" Nicholas sighed. "Because then everyone would come back. The social invitations, the fortune hunters, the false friends. People like Isabella, who only care about the title and money. At least this way, I know that anyone who bothers with me is genuine." "That's a very lonely way to live," Victoria said gently. "I know," Nicholas admitted. "But I didn't know any other way to protect myself, not until now." Victoria smiled. "Well, you have me now, and I may have married you for money, but I promise I'm going to be genuine with you, whether you like it or not." Nicholas laughed, a real, genuine laugh that transformed his face. "I think I might like it very much." They stood together in the garden, the moonlight casting silver shadows around them. It wasn't love. Not yet, but it was a beginning. A fragile trust being built between two people who had both been hurt by the world. "Can I ask you something?" Nicholas said. "Anything." "That night you came into my rooms. You looked at the photograph of me before the accident. What did you think?" Victoria considered the question carefully. "I thought you looked happy. Truly happy. And I wished I could meet that version of you." Nicholas smiled sadly. "That version of me was naive and foolish. He trusted too easily and saw the world through rose-colored glasses." "Maybe," Victoria said. "But he also knew how to be happy. Maybe we can find a balance between the naive boy and the guarded man. Maybe we can help each other heal." Nicholas reached out and gently took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her since their wedding day. "I'd like that," he said softly. "I'd like that very much." They walked back to the house together, hand in hand, both feeling as if something important had shifted between them. The marriage that had begun as a cold transaction was becoming something else, something neither of them had expected. As they reached the door, Nicholas paused. "Victoria?" "Yes?" "Thank you," he said simply, "for being honest with me, for giving us a chance." Victoria squeezed his hand. "Thank you for trusting me with the truth, even if it took you 2 months to do it." He laughed again, and Victoria thought she could get used to that sound. Maybe, just maybe. The morning after their conversation in the garden, Victoria woke up feeling different. For the first time since arriving at Ravenwood Estate, she felt like she had a purpose beyond simply existing in luxury. She and Nicholas were going to try to build a real marriage. She dressed carefully and made her way to the breakfast room, where she found Nicholas already seated at the table. He was reading a newspaper, and for the first time, he wasn't wearing his dark glasses. When she entered, he looked up at her with a genuine smile. "Good morning," he said warmly. "I hope you slept well." "I did, thank you," Victoria replied, taking a seat much closer to him than she normally would have. Instead of sitting at the opposite end of the table, she chose a chair right next to his. Nicholas noticed, and his smile widened. "I see we're abandoning the formal dining arrangement." "Well, you can actually see now, so it seems silly to shout at each other from across the room," Victoria said with a grin. They shared breakfast together, and for the first time, their conversation flowed naturally. Nicholas told her about his plans for updating some of the estate's farming equipment. Victoria shared stories about her childhood at Hartley Manor and her younger brother's antics. "He sounds like quite a character," Nicholas said, laughing at a story about James trying to train the manor's cat to fetch like a dog. "He is," Victoria agreed. "I miss him terribly. And my mother, of course." She hesitated, then added, "Actually, I've been wanting to ask you something. Would it be possible for them to visit sometime? I understand if you'd prefer to keep up the pretense of being blind around guests." Nicholas set down his coffee cup and looked at her seriously. "Victoria, this is your home now. Of course, your family can visit. And actually, I've been thinking about what you said last night, about how lonely this way of living is." "And?" Victoria prompted. "And I think you might be right," Nicholas admitted. "Maybe it's time to stop hiding. Not from everyone all at once, that would cause too much of a scandal. But perhaps we could start having small dinner parties. Invite a few carefully chosen friends. Let people see that the Duke of Ravenwood isn't as much of a recluse as they thought." Victoria reached over and squeezed his hand. "I think that's a wonderful idea. And Nicholas, you don't have to do it for me, but if you decide you want to, I'll be right there with you." Over the following weeks, Victoria and Nicholas began to truly get to know each other. They took long walks through the estate together, with Nicholas pointing out all the places that held special memories for him. He showed her the tree he'd climbed as a boy, the pond where he'd caught his first fish, and the meadow where he'd learned to ride a horse. "This is where the accident happened," he said one afternoon, stopping at a particularly beautiful stretch of countryside. "I was riding too fast, showing off really. The horse spooked at something, and I was thrown, hit my head on a rock." Victoria looked at the peaceful meadow, trying to imagine that terrible day. "It must have been terrifying." "It was," Nicholas admitted. "But you know what the worst part was? When I woke up in the darkness, unable to see, the first person I thought of was Isabella. I was so worried about how she would react, so desperate to still be worthy of her. And then she proved that I never was, not really." "Her loss," Victoria said firmly. "You're a good man, Nicholas. You're kind to your servants, you care about your tenants, and you have a wonderful laugh that I'm determined to hear more often." Nicholas pulled her closer, wrapping an arm around her waist. They'd been growing more comfortable with small touches and affection over the past weeks. "You're unlike anyone I've ever met." "Victoria, Ravenwood. Is that a good thing?" "It's a very good thing," he assured her. They also began working together on estate business. Nicholas was impressed by Victoria's quick mind and her genuine interest in the welfare of the tenants. She suggested several improvements to the workers' cottages and started a small school for the tenants' children. "You're wasted as just a duchess," Nicholas told her one evening as they reviewed the plans for the school. "You should be running the whole country." Victoria laughed. "I'm happy just running this estate with you, though I do have another idea I wanted to discuss." "Oh no," Nicholas said with mock fear. "The last time you had an idea, it cost me £300. But the workers' cottages look so much better now," Victoria protested. "And this idea won't cost nearly as much. I was thinking we could host a harvest festival in the fall. Invite all the tenants and their families. Have games and food and dancing. It would be good for everyone to celebrate together." Nicholas considered this. "You know that would mean revealing the truth about my vision. I can't exactly pretend to be blind while dancing with you at a public festival." "I know," Victoria said carefully. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. You've been hiding for 3 years, Nicholas. Don't you think it's time to stop? He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're right. I'll speak with my mother first. She deserves to know the truth. And then we'll make an announcement that my vision has returned. People will gossip, of course, but perhaps that's unavoidable. Victoria hugged him tightly. I'm proud of you. Don't be proud yet, Nicholas said wryly. Wait until I actually face everyone. The announcement came 2 weeks later. The Duchess of Ravenwood, Nicholas's mother, had been overjoyed to learn that her son could see. She'd cried and hugged him and scolded him for not telling her sooner. When the official announcement was made to society, there was indeed gossip, but there was also genuine happiness from people who had cared about Nicholas before the accident. Isabella Thornton, now married to an earl, sent a stiff note of congratulations that Nicholas immediately threw in the fire. Good riddance, Victoria said, watching the paper burn. You deserve someone much better than her. I know, Nicholas said, pulling Victoria close. I have you. The harvest festival was a wonderful success. The entire estate came alive with color and laughter. Banners hung from every tree, tables groaned under the weight of delicious food, and children ran through the grounds playing games. Victoria stood at the edge of the festivities, watching Nicholas talk and laugh with the tenants as if he'd never hidden himself away. Your Grace, you've done wonders for him, Mr. Whitmore said quietly, appearing at her side. I haven't seen His Grace this happy in years, not since before the accident. Victoria smiled, her heart swelling with pride and affection. He did it himself, he just needed a reason to try. As the sun began to set, the musicians started playing a waltz. Nicholas made his way through the crowd toward Victoria, his eyes never leaving her face. When he reached her, he bowed formally and extended his hand. May I have this dance, Your Grace? He asked with a playful smile. I thought you'd never ask, Victoria replied, placing her hand in his. They moved onto the dance floor, and suddenly everyone was watching them. The blind Duke, who could now see, dancing with his wife at a public celebration. It was the moment that would make Nicholas's recovery real to everyone who had doubted it. But Victoria barely noticed the watching crowd. She was too focused on Nicholas, on the way he held her close, on the warmth in his gray eyes as he looked at her. Are you nervous? She asked softly as they spun across the grass. Terrified, Nicholas admitted with a grin, but also happier than I've been in a very long time. Good, Victoria said. You deserve to be happy, Nicholas. You deserve all the good things life has to offer. Nicholas pulled her closer. I have the best thing right here in my arms, he whispered. A wife who saw past my walls, who challenged me to be brave, who gave me a reason to stop hiding. Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. Nicholas, I love you. Victoria, he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. I know it's only been a few months. And I know this marriage started as a business arrangement. But somewhere along the way, you became the most important person in my life. I love your kindness, your strength, your stubborn refusal to let me push you away. I love everything about you. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. She had hoped, dreamed even, that their growing friendship might turn into something more. But hearing the words spoken aloud made her heart soar. I love you too, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know exactly when it happened. Maybe it was when you first laughed at one of my jokes. Maybe it was when you showed me your favorite tree. Or maybe it was that night in the garden when you finally trusted me with the truth. But somewhere along the way, this stopped being a practical arrangement and became real. Nicholas stopped dancing, right there in the middle of the floor, and kissed her. It was their first real kiss, full of promise and hope and love. Around them, the tenants cheered and applauded, happy to see their Duke finally finding joy again. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were laughing and crying at the same time. I have something for you, Nicholas said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a beautiful ring with a deep blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds. This was my grandmother's ring. She told me before she died that I should give it to the woman who truly won my heart. I want you to have it, Victoria. Not because our marriage was arranged, but because I choose you. Every day, for the rest of my life, I choose you." Victoria's hands shook as Nicholas slipped the ring onto her finger, right next to her plain wedding band. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Not as beautiful as you," Nicholas said, kissing her hand. The music started again, and they continued dancing, lost in their own world. Around them, the festival went on late into the night. But Victoria and Nicholas only had eyes for each other. Later, as they walked back to the manor, hand in hand, Victoria looked up at the stars twinkling overhead. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Pretending to be blind for so long?" Nicholas considered the question. "No," he said finally. "Because if I hadn't, I never would have agreed to marry you. I would have been too afraid of being hurt again." In a strange way, that pretense brought us together. It protected me until I was ready to trust again. Until you showed me that taking risks on people is worth it. Even on people who marry you for money?" Victoria teased gently. Nicholas laughed. "Especially on people brave enough to sacrifice their own happiness for their family. That takes a special kind of courage, Victoria. The kind of courage I'm lucky enough to have in my wife." They reached the manor's entrance, but neither of them wanted the evening to end. Nicholas led Victoria to a stone bench overlooking the gardens, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the moon rise over the estate. "What do you think the future holds for us?" Victoria asked, leaning her head on Nicholas's shoulder. "Everything," Nicholas said confidently. "We'll continue improving the estate. You'll finish your school for the tenants' children. We'll host parties and make friends, and maybe, if we're very lucky, we'll have children of our own to run through these gardens." Victoria smiled at the thought. "That sounds perfect." "It does, doesn't it?" Nicholas agreed. "But most importantly, we'll face it all together. No more secrets, no more hiding, no more walls between us. Just us, building a life based on honesty and trust and love." "And love," Victoria echoed softly. "I like the sound of that." Nicholas turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Victoria Ravenwood, you came into my life when I'd given up on happiness. You saw through my deception and called me out on it. You demanded better from me, and in doing so, you made me want to be better. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. And you saved me too," Victoria said. "You gave my family security when we had none. But more than that, you gave me a home, a purpose, and a love I never expected to find. We saved each other, Nicholas." They sat together on that bench until the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky pink and gold. The harvest festival had ended, but their real celebration was just beginning. A marriage that had started with deception and desperation had transformed into something beautiful and true. As they finally made their way inside, Victoria thought about the frightened girl who had agreed to marry a blind duke for money. That girl seemed like a stranger now. In her place was a woman who had found her strength, her voice, and her heart. And Nicholas, the bitter recluse who had hidden behind dark glasses for 3 years, was gone too. In his place was a man ready to embrace life again, to take risks, to love without fear. Together, they had learned that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most wonderful endings. Their story had started with a lie, but it would continue with a truth more powerful than either of them had imagined. Love, real and lasting love, built on honesty, trust, and the courage to be vulnerable with another person. As Victoria looked at her husband, her partner, her best friend, her love, she knew that every sacrifice, every lonely night, every moment of doubt had been worth it, because it had all led her here, to this man, to this life, to this happiness. And that, she thought with a smile, was the greatest fortune of all.